Joined on the line by a correspondent in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Corletta Wanjohi. Corletta, what can you tell us about the reaction from the country, especially given the fact that it's the seat of the AU?
Well, from Ethiopia, where we are at the African Union has not pronounced itself yet on the situation because, understandably, the security operations in Nairobi are still ongoing. And until the government of Kenya gives out an official statement about what happened, then we might not see the AU reacting really. But from the Kenyan side, I think Kenya is in shock that this happened in an uptown part of the city, and in a place where, around the same place where the same thing happened in about 2015 when there was a mall that was attacked by Shabaab militants. So for the Kenyan security, I think it's an utter shock. For the Kenyan people, it reminds them of the painful memories of 2015. But we've seen Shabaab attacking Kenya from around 2011. Every year, we've got Shabaab attacks.
But also, Corletta, this is not only a Kenyan problem, it's an East African problem. What are just even residents of Ethiopia saying? Okay, I understand that we have a bit of a connection problem there, satellite with our East Africa correspondent in Addis Ababa, Corletta Wanjohi. But we will return to her, as well as our correspondent in Nairobi, Kenya, Sarah Kimani, for the latest. Earlier on, we were speaking to our colleague Peter Ndoro. She did say that gunfire could still be heard. Okay, I understand that our correspondent in Addis Ababa, Corletta Wanjohi, is back on the line with us. So, Corletta, I was just asking if there's been any reaction from Ethiopians as East Africans, because this is not just a Kenyan problem, but an East African problem as well.
Well, it certainly shocks. It certainly sends a lot of warning messages to the neighboring country, Ethiopia, because Kenya and Ethiopia share.
All right.
That lives here. I do not know how people will look at this. But also Ethiopia has to also be very careful, because we understand that Ethiopia and Kenya also have soldiers in the AMISOM in Somalia. So Ethiopia also has to be on alert and make sure that it is prepared just in case Al-Shabaab, as it has already said that it's the one responsible, yet to be confirmed. So Ethiopia has to be on alert, because it also neighbors Somalia on the other side, has troops inside Somalia under the AMISOM. So it puts on alert all the other countries that have especially troops inside AMISOM and have Somali communities living within their countries.
I know you did mention that there has been no reaction from the AU as yet, and probably yet unlikely until those diplomatic channels are negotiated or at least agreed upon. What is likely, though, just from a security perspective? Do we foresee East Africa as a whole strengthening its borders around, obviously there's Kenya, there's Uganda, there are other countries on the surrounds?
Well, we're likely to see more cooperation between the East African states, especially because we know Al-Shabaab, like some people joke, Al-Shabaab has a house in Kenya, has roots in Tanzania, and also tries to recruit in Uganda. So for the three countries, especially the East African countries, it's very easy for Al-Shabaab to thrive there. So it is high time for these East African countries to actually step up their security situations, or security forces, as far as inter-border issues are concerned. But we're also expecting the East African countries to also have an emergency meeting, because once Al-Shabaab strikes in Kenya, then Uganda has to be very alert, and Tanzania also has to be alert. And also one of the issues we are bound to see is the neighboring countries of Kenya and the East African community as well, as a whole, trying to reach out to the grassroots in their own countries, because we know that Al-Shabaab taps into the desperate people at the grassroots level. So we are bound to see the East African community reacting further. And during the summit, we have the African Union summit coming up in February here in Ethiopia. That the issue of Al-Shabaab, the issue of AMISOM, the issue of Somalia, and the issue of counterterrorism is bound to be high on the agenda for the heads of state as a whole in the continent.
And just finally, Corletta, I can imagine that from a tourism perspective, this could also have a major impact on the region.
Yes, it will. It will scare away tourists. That's an obvious. I mean, the immediate effect we are bound to see. We are bound to see diplomatic missions within Kenya, Tanzania, and Kenya offering or sending out warnings to their own people living within Kenya, and also sending out warnings and travel advisories back home. But at the end of the day, if we look at these countries, they have been, despite the Al-Shabaab having been there since 2000 and around 2004, and having put attacks within the East African community since around 2011 consecutively every year, the economies have continued to thrive. The governments have continued to give the international community hope and assurance that this is not a planned thing. Terrorist attacks can happen anywhere, even in the most developed of nations. We've seen that happening. So we're just going to see Kenya probably stepping up, and the East African countries stepping up their assurances to the international community and telling them that their countries are safe and they don't need to be scared. And we're bound to see security forces and security operators in the East African countries also stepping up their operations.
Thanks a lot. Corletta Wanjohi, our correspondent who's in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, just speaking about how the East African region ought to be ramping up, or probably will be ramping up security along its common borders. Our correspondent in